I still remember the exact second she said it. A sweltering August night in Austin, Texas. The family dining room was glowing under a custom crystal chandelier, the kind of warm, golden light meant to soften everything, only it did not. Lydia's voice sliced straight through the laughter like a scalpel. "Get out." The jazz humming in the background seemed to cut out on those two words. Orch. Over 40 guests froze, champagne flutes suspended in midair. My father sat at the head of the table. His face, weathered by decades in Texas politics and corporate boardrooms, gave away nothing. Then, slowly, deliberately, he nodded. It was a gesture of quiet confirmation, as if sealing a truth he had tolerated for years. A faint, satisfied smile touched the corner of my mother's mouth. Orch. It was the exact expression she wore whenever Lydia finished a flawless Chopin nocturne or landed an endorsement deal with a luxury brand. I did not say a word. No tears, no protests, not even a pause. I just set my wine glass down on the Irish linen, smoothed the front of my coat, and turned toward the door. They thought I was walking away in defeat. Orch. What they did not know was that I was not running from them. I was finally walking toward myself. And come tomorrow morning, I would be signing the final closing documents on a $20 million mountain estate in Aspen, Colorado, paid in full with clean, independent funds, without a single dime of family money. Orch. My heels clicked against the polished marble, echoing down the long hallway lined with Lydia's portraits. Her graduation photo from USC, the candid shots from her $1 million engagement party, constant visual reminders that she was the golden child. The guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind their hands. Orch. Some looked away, while others offered that distinct brand of high society pity. The condescending look, reserved for someone they assume has hit rock bottom. I did not care. I was completely done performing gratitude for people who had never truly looked at me. When the front door swung open, the crisp early fall air hit my face. Orch. It carried the scent of coming rain, damp soil, and blooming jasmine from the yard. It smelled like freedom. The heavy door clicked shut behind me. Instantly, the laughter resumed inside and the jazz picked right back up. Standing on the porch, I watched the warm light flicker across the lawn through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Orch. For a fleeting second, the thought crossed my mind to turn back, to tell them that one day they would regret this. Then I let it go. In that house, silence had always been my native language. I walked down the gravel driveway with a steady pace and a surprisingly calm pulse. The night breeze brushed against my skin, catching my reflection on the hood of a parked black Maybach. Orch. My eyes were dry, my mouth set in a firm line. I did not look broken at all. I looked like someone who had finally woken up. I got into my old SUV, turned the key, and the headlights cut through the darkness of the estate. In the rearview mirror, the grand house shrank until it was nothing more than a faint cluster of lights on the hill. Orch. Out on the highway, an old country track was playing softly on the radio, singing about home and heartbreak. The irony pulled a quiet laugh from me. Home. That word had lost its meaning in that house years ago. Maybe it never belonged there in the first place. The road stretched out under the moonlight like a silver ribbon. I rolled down the window and let the rush of wind tangle my hair. Orch. With every mile I put between myself and that property, a heavy weight lifted from my chest. At a red light, I glanced in the mirror again. The deep burgundy lipstick had faded, leaving a faint tint against my pale lips. My eyes looked older than 32, but they also looked sharper. Orch. I thought of Lydia in her pristine designer white dress, the pearls around her neck, soaking in the room's adoration, and I remembered my father's slow nod. No hesitation, no surprise, just quiet approval. That small movement cut deeper than any harsh word ever could. For a brief moment, my mind drifted back to the little girl I used to be. Orch. The girl who waited at the top of the stairs for a goodnight kiss that never came. Back then, I thought staying quiet meant being strong. Now I knew that silence had simply been my way of surviving. Tonight, my silence was a win. The further I drove, the faster the memories rushed in. Growing up, Lydia's laughter always filled the halls. Porch. My mother would hum softly while brushing Lydia's hair, something she never did for me. And whenever I tried to ask for a little fairness, my father would hit me with that corporate executive tone. Evelyn. Be reasonable. My whole life, I was the reasonable one. The strong one. The one who got less simply because they decided I could handle more. I pulled into a gas station just outside Austin. Porch. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed as the tank filled. Inside the convenience store, I grabbed a black coffee and a cheap chocolate bar. The clerk barely looked up. Late night? He mumbled. Fresh start, I said. He did not catch the meaning, but it did not matter. Some milestones do not need an audience. Back in the car, my phone lit up with a notification from an encrypted email thread. Porch. Offer accepted. 20 million wire transfer confirmed. Title deed delivery scheduled for tomorrow morning. I stared at the screen, a quiet smile forming. The deal I had spent 6 months negotiating in secret through offshore trusts and legal proxies was finally done. That private mountain ridge in Aspen, overlooking miles of untouched snow and pine forests, belonged entirely to me. Porch. No mortgage, no family ties. Just mine. As the Austin skyline faded into the distance, rain began tapping against the windshield, light at first before turning into a steady downpour. It brought back another rainy night years ago. Lydia had locked me out of her room, simply because I borrowed one of her cardigans without asking. Porch. I stood in the cold hallway for hours until my mother finally walked by. She did not scold Lydia, she just looked at me and said, "Do not make a scene, Evelyn. You know how sensitive your sister is." I nodded, walked back to my room and went to bed hungry. Even then, I learned the unspoken rule of that household. My discomfort was never a concern, only an inconvenience. Porch. Watching the rain streak across the glass now, the lesson was clear. I was done waiting for someone else to open a door for me. I had built my own. That memory led straight back to the room that defined my childhood, the tiny space under the stairs. The moonlight used to creep through a hairline crack in the wall by my bed, stretching out like a pale mark. Porch. It was the only thing that entered that room without judgment. Every morning, it cast a brief golden hue over the dust before fading, almost as if taking pity on the cramped corner. It was the leftover room nobody wanted, right next to the staircase, sharing a wall with heating pipes that hissed and groaned all winter. They claimed I was the tough one, so I got the smallest room. Porch. In their minds, being resilient meant needing less. The walls were an uneven beige, and the carpet held onto a damp cardboard smell, no matter how many times I vacuumed. Lying in bed, the rush of water through the pipes sounded like a restless animal trapped behind the drywall. I used to fall asleep counting the creaks. Porch. My mother called it cozy and said it had character, but it was really just an enclosed hallway pretending to be a bedroom. Lydia's room, on the other hand, had lace curtains and 2 large east-facing windows. Sunlight woke her up gently every morning, while the groaning pipes woke me. She called her room the palace, and the family laughed along like it was only natural. Porch. Lydia was the family masterpiece. Everything she did made waves in that house. When she sang, my mother pulled out her phone to record every note. When she tripped, my father rushed over like a personal bodyguard. When I scored near the top on my SATs, my mother barely looked up. "That is nice, sweetie. Now go help your sister study for her math test." Porch. I figured out early that praise in our house was a limited resource, and Lydia held exclusive rights to it. I did not resent her back then. I just accepted my role as the background system keeping everything running smoothly. If she had a cold, I made hot tea with organic honey. If my mother had a migraine, I ran down to the pharmacy for ibuprofen. Porch. When my father forgot to pay the electric bill, I folded laundry by flashlight until the power came back on. I thought that was what being a good daughter meant. Then came a night when I was 12. I brought home my first straight-A report card. I waited until after dinner, when the kitchen had quieted down. Porch. My mother was rinsing plates, my father was reading the paper, and Lydia was at the table painting her nails. I set the paper down like an offering. "Good job, honey," my mother said without looking up. A second later, she added, "Can you go look over your sister's math homework?" Lydia did not even lift her head, just let out a smirk. "Sure," I said, because saying no was treated like rebellion. Orch. That night, erasing pencil marks on Lydia's worksheets, it hit me that doing well never meant being seen. It just meant staying quiet. My father had simple rules: do not cause drama, do not complain, and do not give him a reason to lower his newspaper. He called it discipline. My mother called it peace, and I called it stale air. Orch. Once I told him the room by the stairs was too damp, and my blanket smelled like mildew. He turned a page and said, "At least you are not out on the street." That was the end of that. I stopped asking for things. Asking meant showing you wanted something, and my wants only made them uncomfortable. Silence was easier. Orch. Silence carried me through birthdays where Lydia blew out the candles while I cut the cake. It carried me through Christmas mornings, watching her open piles of designer gifts, while I unwrapped 2 pairs of socks and some used paperbacks. It carried me through nights when the pipes rattled like fists against the wall, and I pretended it was applause for how good I had become at disappearing. Orch. If I stayed quiet, nobody could call me ungrateful. If I stayed quiet, maybe they would finally see I was strong. When I was 14, I asked if we could switch rooms just for the summer. My father gave a mocking laugh. "Your sister's room is at the top of the stairs. You want her tripping and getting hurt?" I did not bother reminding him how many times I had slipped on those exact steps. Orch. It did not matter. After that, I stopped asking for room in the physical house. Instead, I built a space inside my own mind, quiet, secure, and out of reach. The garage became my sanctuary. It smelled of motor oil and dust, but it was the only corner that felt like mine. Orch. Every day after school, I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, surrounded by discarded radios and loose wiring from the neighbors. Whenever I fixed something, hearing that initial static pop or watching a tiny light flicker on, it felt like tangible proof that I actually existed. Orch. One day, my father walked in, saw the soldering iron in my hand, and frowned. "Why are you wasting time on junk?" He muttered something under his breath and walked back inside. I wiped my hands on a rag and turned on the radio. An old song drifted through the static. I smiled to an empty garage. If nobody is going to applaud for you, you learn to be your own audience. Orch. By 16, I knew logic made far more sense than people. Machines do not lie. A circuit is either open or closed, and every error has a root cause. I started tutoring wealthy classmates for cash, bought electronic components, and taught myself Python and C++ in the school computer lab. My mother did not approve. "That is for boys," she said one morning while making pancakes for Lydia's friends. Orch. "Go do something refined, maybe pick piano back up." I stayed quiet. My father grunted behind his paper. Lydia, leaning against the counter, chimed in, "You will end up fixing microwaves, not building dreams." I offered a polite smile and finished my toast. That night, I stayed up until 2 in the morning, wiring a miniature traffic flow model with blinking LEDs. Orch. "First run, 0 errors," I whispered to myself. "If nobody builds a bridge for you, you build your own." I kept that model tucked under my bed. Late at night, I would turn it on just to watch the lights pulse in rhythm, like a miniature city that belonged only to me. That was the year I realized surviving was not enough. I needed to get out of that house. Orch. I needed to break free from the label of the strong one and escape the dismissive whispers of, "She will be fine." I started collecting college brochures, highlighting engineering programs that offered full-ride scholarships and housing. I did not have a trust fund, but I had a clean GPA and near-perfect test scores, and results opened doors. Orch. The acceptance letter arrived that spring, neatly folded inside a white envelope, bearing the seal of the University of Washington in Seattle. I had checked the mailbox every day, my chest tightening at the squeak of the metal door. Holding it in my hands, it felt almost too good to be true. Full scholarship, College of Engineering. Porch. Seeing it in print felt unreal, a clean slate against a chaotic life. Sitting in that room by the stairs with its scent of old paint, I cried quietly. I thought that maybe, finally, this would make them proud. At dinner, I waited until Lydia finished recounting her high school choir solo audition. When the table went quiet, I said, I got into college. Full ride, engineering. Porch. The room froze for a few seconds. My mother blinked, folded her napkin, and said, Seattle is so far. How are you going to manage on your own? My father looked at me with a critical eye. Can you afford to move? I told them everything was covered by the scholarship. Lydia twirled a lock of hair and let out a light laugh. You will be back in a month. You hate change. Porch. I looked at her, searching for any hint of genuine warmth, but found only smug amusement. I just smiled. We will see. After that, the room felt even colder. Before I had even finished my plate, my mother started clearing the table. My father opened his paper again. Lydia hummed her upcoming concert piece. I sat there, invisible, the silence pressing heavy against my chest. Porch. On the morning I left for college, the house smelled of coffee and stale dust. My mother handed me a brown paper bag with a turkey sandwich. No mustard, just how I liked it, though her expression remained distant. Call if you need anything, she said, knowing full well I would not. My father was already waiting in the driveway with the engine idling. Porch. Lydia stood in the doorway, arms crossed, hair styled to perfection. Do not act like you are escaping, she scoffed. I am not running, I replied softly. I am starting. The drive to the airport was silent. My father tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, eyes locked on the road. When he pulled up to the terminal at Austin Bergstrom, he did not even turn off the engine. Porch. I grabbed my single suitcase, thanked him, and shut the door. He gave a single nod and drove off into the traffic flow. The air was brisk, but the world suddenly felt wide open. For the first time in my life, I was truly on my own, and I was not afraid. Seattle greeted me with its classic overcast skies and light drizzle. Porch. The air smelled crisp, carrying the scent of fresh rain and the promise of something entirely new. My dorm room was small, barely larger than the space under the stairs, but it had a window overlooking the campus quad. That first morning, I pulled back the curtains and let the soft daylight pour in. It felt like taking a deep breath of fresh air after holding it underwater for years. Porch. My roommate was an outgoing girl from Oregon who spent her days talking about weekend plans and campus social life. I listened with a smile but kept to myself. I was not used to people asking questions just to get to know me. Weeks turned into months. The engineering coursework was intense, but it made sense. Calculus equations followed clear rules. My family never did. Porch. One afternoon in the mechanical engineering lab, my professor, Dr. Harper, noticed me. I had stayed 3 hours past class trying to rewrite the logic for a robotic arm prototype that would not align properly. She walked over, adjusted her glasses, looked at the terminal on my screen and said, You have been at this for 3 hours, haven't you? I nodded. Porch. You see structural patterns others miss, she said, looking right at me. Do not shrink just because the room is not applauding. Those words hit deep. For the first time, someone spoke to me like a main character, not a background extra. Dr. Harper became my mentor. Porch. She taught me how to present technical work with authority and how to hold my ground in male-dominated boardrooms without apologizing for taking up space. Walking across campus on a drizzly afternoon, she told me, The world does not owe you validation, but it cannot take away your competence. I carried that with me like armor. Porch. At night, I occasionally caught myself glancing at my phone, half hoping for a message from home. The screen stayed dark. When my mother finally called, my pulse raced as I answered. Your sister's business is taking off, she said. Her voice bright with pride. She was just featured in a lifestyle magazine. That is great, I replied evenly. Porch. Are you still working with those computers? She asked. Still working with computers. Yes, I said. A brief silence hung on the line. I could picture her standing in the Austin kitchen, wiping the counter with a towel. Lydia is thinking about launching her own startup, she continued. You should give her some input. You are good with numbers. I think she is going to do amazing. Orch. I am sure she will, I said, hanging up before the suffocating silence would settle in again. When I looked up, the lab was empty except for Dr. Harper packing her laptop. She gave me an understanding look without asking questions. We both understood this unspoken reality. The following summer, with a strong recommendation from Dr. Harper, I landed an internship at an automation firm in Denver, Colorado. When the offer letter came through, I cried again, but this time from pure relief. It felt like another quiet victory. Before I left Seattle, Dr. Harper handed me a new hardcover notebook. Fill it with a life they could never even imagine, she told me. I promised her I would. The bus ride to Colorado felt surreal. The coach wound through the snow-capped Rockies, passing clear, glassy rivers. With my forehead resting against the glass, I traced the ridgelines. For the first time, I did not feel like I was running away from anything. I was moving towards something substantial. Every turn put more distance between me and the house that had kept me small. Late that night, during a rest stop in the mountains, I stepped outside. The air was sharp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and absolute stillness. Above me, the stars felt close enough to touch. I closed my eyes and let the night air clear my head. I did not know what was waiting for me ahead, a new job, a new city, or people who might finally see me for who I was. But I knew one thing for certain. The bridge I had built in my mind was finally touching real ground. Back in my seat, I opened Dr. Harper's notebook and wrote the first line on the blank page. I am done building in silence. From now on, I will use silence to build. The bus hummed as highway lights blended into a long golden streak against the dark. As we climbed higher into the mountains, dawn broke over the horizon, catching the peaks in sharp, clear morning light. Looking out the window, I realized I was looking down at the world from heights I had once only dreamed about. I had no idea yet that Denver would become the place where I turned that quiet resolve into real influence. The bus pulled into downtown Denver with a hiss of air brakes. The air carried a mix of crisp pine, city traffic, and roasted coffee. The city felt vast, with glass high-rises catching the pale autumn sun and the Rockies standing tall behind them. I stepped onto the platform with my single bag, holding the notebook close. It might not have looked like freedom from the outside, but it was. My heart beat steadily, grounded by the quiet comfort of starting fresh where nobody knew my name. The company, Wendell Automation, occupied the third floor of a converted brick warehouse. Inside, the space hummed with server fans and the hiss of an espresso machine. Desks were cluttered with tangled cables, sticky notes, and empty energy drink cans. My title was intern, but beyond handing me a login and a worn-out office chair with instructions to keep up, nobody took the time to onboard me. I did not mind. Being left alone felt familiar, just in a different setting. The first few weeks were chaotic. Deadlines slipped, legacy code broke, and developers were on edge. I stayed quiet, studying their architecture and reading team dynamics the way I read systems. When someone got frustrated, I stayed polite, quietly resolved the bugs in their pull requests, and kept moving. One afternoon, I fixed a critical system vulnerability that had stalled the release for days. The lead engineer looked over at my screen, gave a quick nod, and said, "Good catch." It was a small acknowledgement, but it filled a space that had always been empty. Then I met Rachel Lynn. She was the technical director, in her 40s, sharp, direct, and remarkably composed. She wore simple black knits, silver earrings, and never wasted words. The first time she stopped at my desk, I thought I was in trouble. "You refactored the underlying logic on this deployment," she said, pointing to my monitor. "Walk me through it." I did, slightly nervous, but keeping my breakdown structured. She watched the terminal update, then gave a slight nod. "You just saved us 3 weeks of sprint time." She turned and walked away. That evening, after everyone else logged off, I stayed at my desk, staring at the terminal until the text blurred. Nobody had ever spoken to me like that before. Over the next few months, Rachel became a steadying presence in my career. Her support was not the performative kindness my mother practiced. It was built on direct, constructive honesty. She pushed me on system design and taught me to speak up clearly in planning meetings, even when my voice felt unsteady. If you make yourself invisible behind your work, she told me firmly during one review, other people will gladly take credit for it. Do not make it easy for them. Working late on major releases, we would often be the only ones left before the night cleaning crew arrived. She would sit across from me with chamomile tea, the monitor light casting sharp reflections against her glasses. You know, Evelyn, she said one night, being underestimated is an overlooked advantage. It lets you see exactly how people operate when they think you are no threat to them. I did not say much, but I took every word to heart. By spring, the company brought me on as a full-time software engineer, making me the youngest on the team. During the all-hands announcement, the CEO gave a standard corporate smile. She is quiet, but she always gets the job done. A light chuckle went around the room, the usual polite workplace reaction. Rachel did not laugh. She leaned in slightly and whispered, "Quiet does not mean small." A week later, a local tech outlet ran a feature on women in engineering, including a photo of me working on a server rack. The caption read, "Evelyn Callahan, Breaking Conventions in Systems Automation." I printed the piece and placed it inside Dr. Harper's notebook, tucked between two clean pages. I did not mail it home to Texas. I was done asking for approval from people who had none to give. Then came Julian Cross. He joined the team on a Monday, bringing an easy confidence and charm that won people over instantly. A front-end developer with an uncanny ability to read the room, he was quick-witted, sometimes bordering on careless, but people liked him. His desk sat 2 steps from mine. From day one, he started asking for pointers, starting with basic repo structures, merge conflicts, and framework syntax before shifting into casual conversation. "Do you think systems are completely predictable?" he asked one afternoon, leaning back in his chair. "Far more predictable than people," I said without looking up. He grinned. "That is why I like working with them." Julian was different from the rest of the team. He was sharp, driven, and intensely ambitious. We paired up on several cross-functional projects, and for a while, the dynamic worked well. His easygoing attitude cut through the office tension and made the long hours manageable. Still, there were subtle moments that raised red flags. During weekly sprint demos, he would take technical concepts I had explained to him, rephrase them in polished business terms, and pitch them to executives who nodded along with enthusiasm. Rachel picked up on it. Walking past my desk one evening after Julian left, she said quietly, "Be careful with people who cheer the loudest. Sometimes they are just building up their own profile." I gave a polite smile and let it go. Deep down, I wanted to believe Julian was genuine. I had spent so much of my life hoping someone would be. Around that time, my mother called for the first time in months. I watched her name light up the screen before finally answering. "Your sister's brand is doing incredible," she announced cheerfully. "She just landed a feature in a lifestyle magazine." "That is great," I said evenly. "Are you still doing that computer work?" she asked. "Still with the systems, yes," I replied. A brief pause followed. I could picture her standing in the bright kitchen in Austin, distracted. "Lydia is thinking about scaling her business," my mother added. "You should help her with the technical side. You were always good with logic. She has so much potential." "I am sure she does," I said, ending the call before that familiar heavy silence took hold again. Looking up, the office was quiet, with Rachel packing her laptop into her bag. She gave me a knowing glance, understanding the dynamic without needing an explanation. A few months later, Rachel accepted a senior executive role elsewhere, offering better scope and fewer internal politics. Her departure shifted the balance on the team. On her final day, she handed me an encrypted drive. "These are my architecture notes from past enterprise deployments," she said. "Whenever you need a reminder of what you are capable of, take a look." I tried to thank her, but the words caught in my throat. She offered a calm smile. "Arch, you will figure out how to command the room without raising your voice." After Rachel left, Julian stepped into the lead developer position. He stopped by my desk with an enthusiastic congratulations on my transition to project manager, acting as though we were partners building something major together. "Arch, we can build something genuinely disruptive here," he said, looking at me directly. "You have the technical precision, and I know how to pitch to leadership." It sounded half casual, half serious. I smiled along, completely unaware that it was the opening chapter of a much darker turn. That evening, the team held a small gathering at a downtown lounge to celebrate a major product launch. I stood near the edge of the room with a club soda, watching the team toast at the bar. Julian gave a polished toast about the company's trajectory, then caught my eye across the room and raised his glass in my direction. Out of habit, I returned a small smile. The background music picked up, and for a brief moment I felt a rare sense of optimism, wondering if things were finally falling into place. Walking back to my apartment through the light Denver rain, the neon signs reflected in gold across the wet pavement. My reflection looked back from the puddles, calm, tired around the eyes, but carrying an unmistakable weariness beneath the composed exterior. I thought about Rachel's warning about performative praise, my mother's dismissive comments, Lydia standing in the spotlight, and all those years spent believing that staying quiet equaled staying strong. Back in my apartment, with the gentle hum of the heater filling the space, Dr. Harper's notebook sat on the desk, still half empty. I opened it and wrote down one final thought. When the world finally takes notice, I realize it owes me nothing. But I owe everything to myself. I closed the notebook, switched off the desk lamp, and stood by the window. Outside, Denver shimmered through a thin veil of rain, buzzing with noise and untold fortunes. In this restless city, I had finally found my very first real audience, a mentor who truly believed in me, a partner I never should have trusted, and myself, a woman who was finally realizing that silence was never just about enduring. It was about taking back control. Tomorrow would bring a fresh start and another hard test. But tonight, I let the city hum just for me. I was no longer that little girl huddled by the staircase. I was the architect behind the screen, building a world where nobody ever has to beg for permission just to be seen. I still remember the exact second she said it. A sweltering August night in Austin, Texas. The family dining room was glowing under a custom crystal chandelier, the kind of warm golden light meant to soften everything, only it did not. Lydia's voice sliced straight through the laughter like a scalpel. "Get out!" The jazz humming in the background seemed to cut out on those two words. Over 40 guests froze, champagne flutes suspended in midair. My father sat at the head of the table. His face, weathered by decades in Texas politics and corporate boardrooms, gave away nothing. Then slowly, deliberately, he nodded. It was a gesture of quiet confirmation, as if sealing a truth he had tolerated for years. A faint, satisfied smile touched the corner of my mother's mouth. It was the exact expression she wore whenever Lydia finished a flawless Chopin nocturne or landed an endorsement deal with a luxury brand. I did not say a word. No tears, no protests, not even a pause. I just set my wineglass down on the Irish linen, smoothed the front of my coat, and turned toward the door. They thought I was walking away in defeat. What they did not know was that I was not running from them. I was finally walking toward myself. And come tomorrow morning, I would be signing the final closing documents on a $20 million mountain estate in Telluride, Colorado, paid in full with clean, independent funds, without a single dime of family money. My heels clicked against the polished marble, echoing down the long hallway lined with Lydia's portraits. Her graduation photo from USC, the candid shots from her $1 million engagement party, constant visual reminders that she was the golden child. The guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind their hands. Some looked away, while others offered that distinct brand of high society pity, the condescending look reserved for someone they assume has hit rock bottom. I did not care. I was completely done performing gratitude for people who had never truly looked at me. When the front door swung open, the crisp early fall air hit my face. It carried the scent of coming rain, damp soil, and blooming jasmine from the yard. It smelled like freedom. The heavy door clicked shut behind me. Instantly, the laughter resumed inside, and the jazz picked right back up. Standing on the porch, I watched the warm light flicker across the lawn, through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a fleeting second, the thought crossed my mind to turn back, to tell them that one day they would regret this. Then I let it go. In that house, silence had always been my native language. I walked down the gravel driveway with a steady pace and a surprisingly calm pulse. The night breeze brushed against my skin, catching my reflection on the hood of a parked black Maybach. My eyes were dry, my mouth set in a firm line. I did not look broken at all. I looked like someone who had finally woken up. I got into my old SUV, turned the key, and the headlights cut through the darkness of the estate. In the rearview mirror, the grand house shrank until it was nothing more than a faint cluster of lights on the hill. Out on the highway, an old country track was playing softly on the radio, singing about home and heartbreak. The irony pulled a quiet laugh from me. Home. That word had lost its meaning in that house years ago. Maybe it never belonged there in the first place. The road stretched out under the moonlight like a silver ribbon. I rolled down the window and let the rush of wind tangle my hair. With every mile I put between myself and that property, a heavy weight lifted from my chest. At a red light, I glanced in the mirror again. The deep burgundy lipstick had faded, leaving a faint tint against my pale lips. My eyes looked older than 32, but they also looked sharper. I thought of Lydia in her pristine designer white dress, the pearls around her neck, soaking in the room's adoration, and I remembered my father's slow nod. No hesitation, no surprise, just quiet approval. That small movement cut deeper than any harsh word ever could. For a brief moment, my mind drifted back to the little girl I used to be. The girl who waited at the top of the stairs for a goodnight kiss that never came. Back then, I thought staying quiet meant being strong. Now I knew that silence had simply been my way of surviving. But tonight, it was a win. The further I drove, the faster the memories rushed in. Growing up, Lydia's laughter always filled the halls. My mother would hum softly while brushing Lydia's hair, something she never did for me, and whenever I tried to ask for a little fairness, my father would hit me with that corporate executive tone. Evelyn, be reasonable. My whole life, I was the reasonable one, the strong one. The one who got less simply because they decided I could handle more. I pulled into a gas station just outside Austin. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed as the tank filled. Inside the convenience store, I grabbed a black coffee and a cheap chocolate bar. The clerk barely looked up. Late night? He mumbled. Fresh start, I said. He did not catch the meaning, but it did not matter. Some milestones do not need an audience. Back in the car, my phone lit up with a notification from an encrypted email thread. Offer accepted. 20 million wire transfer confirmed. Title deed delivery scheduled for tomorrow morning. I stared at the screen, a quiet smile forming. The deal I had spent 6 months negotiating in secret through legal proxies was finally done. That private mountain ridge in Colorado, overlooking miles of untouched snow and pine forests, belonged entirely to me. No mortgage, no family ties. Just mine. As the Austin skyline faded into the distance, rain began tapping against the windshield, light at first before turning into a steady downpour. It brought back another rainy night years ago. Lydia had locked me out of her room simply because I borrowed one of her cardigans without asking. I stood in the cold hallway for hours, until my mother finally walked by. She did not scold Lydia. Porch. She just looked at me and said, "Do not make a scene, Evelyn. You know how sensitive your sister is." I nodded, walked back to my room, and went to bed hungry. Even then, I learned the unspoken rule of that household. My discomfort was never a concern, only an inconvenience. Watching the rain streak across the glass now, the lesson was clear. Porch. I was done waiting for someone else to open a door for me. I had built my own. That memory led straight back to the room that defined my childhood. The tiny space under the stairs. The moonlight used to creep through a hairline crack in the wall by my bed, stretching out like a pale mark. It was the only thing that entered that room without judgment. Porch. Every morning, it cast a brief golden hue over the dust before fading, almost as if taking pity on the cramped corner. It was the leftover room nobody wanted, right next to the staircase, sharing a wall with heating pipes that hissed and groaned all winter. They claimed I was the tough one, so I got the smallest room. In their minds, being resilient meant needing less. Porch. The walls were an uneven beige, and the carpet held on to a damp cardboard smell no matter how many times I vacuumed. My mother called it cozy and said it had character, but it was really just an enclosed hallway pretending to be a bedroom. In contrast, Lydia's room had lace curtains and 2 large, east-facing windows. Sunlight woke her up gently every morning, while the groaning pipes woke me. Porch. She called her room the palace, and the family laughed along like it was only natural. Lydia was the family masterpiece. Everything she did made waves in that house. When she sang, my mother pulled out her phone to record every note. When she tripped, my father rushed over like a personal bodyguard. Porch. When I scored near the top on my standardized tests, my mother barely looked up. "That is nice, sweetie. Now go help your sister study for her math test." I figured out early that praise in our house was a limited resource, and Lydia held exclusive rights to it. Then came a night when I was 12. I brought home my first straight-A report card. Porch. I waited until after dinner when the kitchen had quieted down. My mother was rinsing plates, my father was reading the paper, and Lydia was at the table painting her nails. I set the paper down like an offering. "Good job, honey," my mother said without looking up. A second later, she added, "Can you go look over your sister's math homework?" Porch. Lydia did not even lift her head, just let out a smirk. "Sure," I said, because saying no was treated like rebellion. That night, erasing pencil marks on Lydia's worksheets, it hit me that doing well never meant being seen. It just meant staying quiet. My father had simple rules: do not cause drama, do not complain, and do not give him a reason to lower his newspaper. Porch. He called it discipline, my mother called it peace, and I called it stale air. If I stayed quiet, nobody could call me ungrateful. If I stayed quiet, maybe they would finally see I was strong. On Lydia's 10th birthday, the house was packed with kids in polished shoes, making enough noise to cause a headache. Porch. My mother hung pink ribbons everywhere and baked an elaborate fondant cake with Lydia's name on it. Meanwhile, I was told to stay in the kitchen and wash dishes. The sound of laughter spilled over the floor all the way to where I was scrubbing glasses. When the candles were blown out, I peeked from behind the door. Lydia's face was glowing in the candlelight. Porch. For a moment, she looked like the center of the universe. Then she caught me watching. "Shut the door, Evelyn. There is a draft," she said. Everyone laughed. I smiled too, because that was what the strong girl was supposed to do. Late that night, after the guests left, I found a half-burned candle on the counter. I lit it, made a wish I never said out loud, and blew it out. Porch. That was the only birthday candle I ever had. My father was a man of structure, not sentiment. When Lydia came home late, he said she was finding herself. When I was 5 minutes late from tutoring, he blocked the entryway with a cold stare. "If you cannot follow the rules, you will lose your way." I wanted to tell him I was already lost, but strong girls did not talk like that. Porch. When I was 14, I asked if we could switch rooms just for the summer. My father gave a mocking laugh. "Your sister's room is at the top of the stairs. You want her tripping and getting hurt?" I did not bother reminding him how many times I had slipped on those exact steps. It did not matter. After that, I stopped asking for room in the physical house. Porch. Instead, I built a space inside my own mind. In the garage, I found my sanctuary. It smelled of motor oil and dust, but it was the only corner that felt like mine. Every day after school, I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, surrounded by discarded radios and loose wiring from the neighbors. Whenever I fixed something, it felt like tangible proof that I actually existed. Porch. By 16, I knew logic made far more sense than people. Machines do not lie. A circuit is either open or closed. I started tutoring wealthy classmates for cash, bought electronic components, and taught myself Python and C++ in the school computer lab. My mother did not approve. "That is for boys," she said. Lydia chimed in. "You will end up fixing microwaves, not building dreams." Porch. I offered a polite smile. That night, I stayed up until 2 in the morning, wiring a miniature traffic flow model with blinking LEDs. If nobody builds a bridge for you, you build your own. I began collecting college brochures, searching for engineering programs that offered full-ride scholarships. Porch. The acceptance letter arrived that spring, a full scholarship to the University of Washington in Seattle. At dinner, I shared the news. My mother folded her napkin and said, "Seattle is so far. How are you going to manage on your own?" My father looked at me with a critical eye. "Can you afford to move?" Lydia twirled a lock of hair and laughed lightly. "You will be back in a month." Porch. You hate change. I just smiled. "We will see." On the morning I left for college, the house smelled of coffee and dust. My father waited in the driveway with the engine idling. Lydia stood in the doorway, throwing out a mocking comment. "Do not act like you are escaping." "I am not running," I replied softly. "I am starting." Seattle greeted me with overcast skies and light drizzle. Porch. My dorm room was small, but it had a window overlooking the campus. The coursework was intense, but calculus equations followed clear rules, unlike my family. In the mechanical engineering lab, my professor, Dr. Harper, took notice of me. "You see structural patterns others miss," she said, looking right at me. "Do not shrink just because the room is not applauding." Porch. She taught me how to present technical work with authority and how to hold my ground without apologizing for taking up space. The following summer, with Dr. Harper's strong recommendation, I landed an internship at Wendell Automation, a tech firm in Denver. When the offer came through, I cried from pure relief. Before I left Seattle, Dr. Harper handed me a new hardcover notebook. Porch. "Fill it with a life they could never even imagine," she told me. Denver smelled of pine and fresh coffee. The company office was cluttered with wires, sticky notes, and empty energy drink cans. My title was intern, but after I resolved a critical system vulnerability that had stalled the project for days, technical director Rachel Lynn took notice. Porch. Rachel was in her 40s, sharp, direct, and never wasted words. "If you make yourself invisible behind your work," she told me firmly, "other people will gladly take credit for it." By spring, the company offered me a full-time software engineering role. The CEO gave a standard corporate smile during the announcement. "She is quiet, but she always gets the job done." Rachel did not smile. Porch. She leaned in and whispered, "Quiet does not mean small." Then came Julian Cross. He arrived with an easy confidence, a sharp front-end developer with ambitious goals. We paired up on several cross-functional projects, and his humor made the long hours manageable. Porch. But during weekly sprint demos, he would take my technical concepts, rephrase them in polished sales pitches, and present them as his own. Rachel saw right through it. Be careful with people who cheer the loudest. Sometimes they are just building up their own profile. A few months later, Rachel moved on to a senior executive role elsewhere. Porch. She handed me an encrypted drive. "These are my architecture notes. You will figure out how to command the room without raising your voice." After Rachel left, Julian took over as lead developer. He stopped by my desk with a wide grin. "We can build something disruptive together. You have the technical precision and I have the pitch." Snow was drifting down over the Denver skyline. Porch. The office was quiet, and Julian sat across from me with half a cup of cold coffee, an intense look in his eyes. "Have you thought about what comes next?" he asked, turning his laptop toward me. On the screen was a rough concept for a financial app called Northlight. "We can build this. People need something to guide them through the dark." Within a month, we handed in our resignations. Porch. We rented a basement workspace and lived on instant noodles. When Northlight hit 10,000 downloads, we celebrated with cold pizza and flat soda. A year later, we landed the cover of a regional startup magazine. The headline read, "The Man Bringing Minimalism to FinTech." Julian's photo took up half the page, while my name was buried in the fine print as co-founder and lead engineer. Porch. When I showed it to him, he brushed it off. "You know how media works. They need an outward-facing persona." I smiled, because accommodating had always been my default. That was when the cracks began to show. Julian was away for longer stretches, returning with new contacts and thin explanations. Porch. One afternoon, checking our shared inbox, I found an unfamiliar email, term sheet review from Brightline Ventures. It was forwarded from Julian's personal account, and my name was nowhere on the thread. He was negotiating an acquisition behind my back. I stayed late and waited for him. Porch. When he walked in past 9 on a phone call, promising to deliver the core algorithm next quarter, he froze upon seeing me. "Who is we?" I asked calmly. He tensed up. "It is not what you think." "It never is," I said. "You are selling Northlight." He ran a hand through his hair. "Evelyn, this is business. You are getting too emotional." "Emotional?" A quiet, bitter laugh escaped me. Porch. "You are handing over the only thing I built without their influence." "You move too slowly," he muttered. "I am just finishing what we started." I looked at him for a long moment. "I hope the spotlight you are chasing is worth the silence you are about to get." He did not answer. 2 weeks later, the backing fell through. The runway ran dry, and we could not cover payroll. Porch. The team left one by one. On the final day, I shared the reality with our team. No drama, just the clear facts. I wrote recommendations and sent referrals. Once the office was completely empty, I erased the user milestone goal from the whiteboard and took our nameplate off the door. Walking out into the snowy Denver streets, I did not cry. Porch. Back in my apartment, I set the plate on the counter and opened my laptop. Looking at the blank screen, I created a new document and typed, "For those who are underestimated, for those who build in silence." Over the following weeks, I woke up before dawn, coding under the dim kitchen light, building, debugging, refining. It became my rhythm. Porch. One morning, Julian's name surfaced in tech news. Northlight acquired by Brightline Ventures, founding CEO joins leadership team. They called him a visionary. My name was never mentioned. I closed the tab with a quiet smile. At midnight, I named my new initiative Lantern. It was more than a code repository, it was a commitment. Porch. Outside, snow continued to fall, burying the streets, the rooftops, and old scars. Some endings are not losses, they are clean slates. That winter was the coldest I had ever experienced. The snow in Denver set hard like glass. I rented a small studio above a bakery, waking up to the sound of delivery trucks in the alley. Porch. I would pull on an oversized sweater, brew a pot of black coffee, and open my laptop. The glow from the monitor was the only warmth in the room. Lantern started as a simple project folder. I did not know its full scale yet, but I knew what it would not be. It would not rely on hollow marketing or empty promises. Porch. It did not need a hype-driven spokesperson, and it would not chase superficial vanity metrics. It would be quiet, robust, and genuinely useful. The first few weeks were a blur of intense focus. I mapped out data flows on paper while snow battered the windows, barely sleeping, focused entirely on the build. Then it hit me. I was not creating this to escape the past. Porch. I was creating it to set a new standard. By February, Lantern had its clear direction. A financial technology engine designed for everyday people navigating real economic strain, without punitive hidden fees. But I could not scale it alone. I needed the right team. I sent a late-night note to Rachel. building something new. Orch. Need someone who understands how to turn quiet execution into serious strategy. Interested? An hour later, her reply arrived. Give me 2 weeks, show me something real. I worked around the clock, building Lantern's core engine, an adaptive model that worked alongside user habits rather than trapping them in penalties. Orch. When Rachel saw the working prototype, she looked up with a calm smile. You built this in a month? No, I answered. I built this out of 10 years of being overlooked. She gave an appreciative nod. Then let us scale it properly. We met in quiet coffee shops and borrowed conference rooms. Orch. Rachel brought in Marcus, a former institutional compliance officer who had walked away from corporate banking after seeing how unfairly traditional systems treated everyday consumers. Together, the three of us built something grounded in ethics and clean architecture. Orch. By spring, Lantern onboarded its first private beta users, a single parent in Boulder, a displaced factory worker in Pueblo, a student managing mounting debt. We ran 0 public ads. We just listened to user needs. Late one night, a message came in that stopped me in my tracks. This platform helped me save enough for my daughter's dental care. Orch. Thank you for building something for people like us. Sitting at my kitchen table, I let the tears fall until my coffee went cold. That was the validation I had spent my entire youth hoping to receive from people who were incapable of giving it. 6 months later, Lantern established its headquarters in Silicon Valley. Orch. Rachel led strategic operations, Marcus directed regulatory compliance, and I served as the quiet architect behind every core release. We avoided unnecessary venture noise, prioritizing precision above all. When we opened the platform publicly, user adoption outpaced Northlight's entire first-year numbers within 30 days. Orch. Looking at the growth metrics, Rachel smiled. Still think quiet execution does not carry real weight? It is not about volume, I replied. It is about delivering real utility. When major tech outlets requested interviews, Rachel stepped forward as the public representative. She never asked if I wanted the spotlight, and I never requested it. She was articulate, poised, and confident on camera. Orch. I stayed behind the scenes optimizing the core systems, letting the results stand for themselves. You are the invisible engine in the code, she once remarked. I prefer it that way, I told her, and meant it. Over the next 2 years, Lantern expanded rapidly. We secured patents on our algorithmic models and earned quiet recognition within enterprise software circles. Orch. I kept my family out of it entirely. My mother's contact remained dormant on my phone, and Lydia's name only crossed my screen during occasional brand announcements, which I scrolled past without a second thought. I no longer needed their approval. What I had built stood on its own. In December, Rachel and I attended a major technology summit in San Francisco. Orch. The venue was a bustling hall of high-level investors and founders. Lantern was selected for a main-stage product briefing. Rachel delivered the presentation while I watched from the audience. During the open discussion, an institutional partner raised his hand. Who is the primary architect behind the core framework? Orch. Rachel paused briefly, offering a diplomatic answer. We operate as a fully integrated engineering team. The investor adjusted his glasses. The core filings list E. Callahan as the sole inventor. Is she in the room today? Rachel glanced toward me. I gave a subtle shake of my head. Turning back to the room, Rachel addressed the audience. She prefers to let the architecture speak for itself. Orch. A low murmur of genuine interest swept through the room. I sat quietly in my seat. For the first time, my name held undeniable authority in a high-stakes room, and I felt zero need to stand up and perform for it. That evening, walking along the waterfront, watching the tide move under the city lights, I knew I had built an enterprise that operated purely on substance. That was real independence. Orch. The following morning, an acquisition offer arrived from a financial institution 3 times our size, looking to acquire Lantern outright. Seeing the valuation, Rachel's eyes widened. This is enough to buy an entire mountain range. I laughed softly. Maybe just the summit. We declined the offer. The timing was not right. Porch. Everything shifted when a cream-colored envelope with gold lettering arrived in the mail. My name was written on the front in neat script, with a return address from Austin, Texas. I nearly tossed it straight into the shredder. Instead, I opened it. Porch. Inside was a formal invitation. Join us in celebrating Lydia Callahan's 30th birthday. On the back was a polished photo of her holding champagne, with a handwritten note from my mother in blue ink. We hope you can make it home, sweetheart. Love, Mom. Home, the word felt completely foreign. I am not sure why I booked that late-night flight to Austin. Porch. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe the part of me that once looked for their approval just wanted to see if their words still had any power over me. I picked up an exclusive bottle of Reserve Cabernet from a boutique vineyard in Santa Rosa and paired it with a framed watercolor I had kept for years, a painting of golden reeds by a lake that my mother had always admired. Porch. When my flight touched down in Austin, the familiar humid heat settled over me. The house looked completely unchanged, the blue shutters, the gravel drive, the wind chimes. I walked up and knocked. My father opened the door. He looked older, though the same detachment remained in his eyes. You came, he said, caught somewhere between surprise and unease. Porch. I held up the wine and the painting. I figured she had enough candles. He let out an awkward laugh and stepped aside. The living room was filled with guests, the air heavy with expensive perfume and catering trays. Lydia stood by the mantel in a designer white dress, commanding the room. My mother walked over first. You look well, she said. Porch. When I handed her the painting, her face softened for a second. You kept this. I remember how much you loved it. A brief, genuine smile appeared, and then she turned away to greet other arrivals, that fleeting warmth evaporating into thin air. Dinner was served outdoors under string lights in the backyard. Lydia sat at the center, drawing all the attention. Porch. When the toasts began, my mother raised her glass first. To my beautiful girl who never stops making us proud. My father followed. You are the light of this family. Then Lydia stood up, glass in hand. Thank you all for being here. 30 feels like a major milestone, and having this support means everything. The guests applauded. Porch. Waiting for the room to settle, she added, Of course we cannot forget my older sister Evelyn, who disappeared for years. Her eyes locked onto mine. Most of you probably did not even know I had a sister, right? A few polite chuckles rippled through the tables. Seriously, where have you been, Evelyn? Off the grid? No public profiles, no photos, no updates. Did you get taken by aliens? Porch. A few guests let out amused smirks. A cold tension settled over the table. My mother held a strained smile while my father took a sip of his drink. Lydia waited for my reaction. When I stayed completely still, she leaned in slightly. Come on, say something. Let everyone know you are still here. I stood up deliberately. I think the point has already been made. Her expression hardened. Porch. If you cannot be part of the celebration, she said, her voice turning sharp, then maybe you should not be here at all. Get out! A heavy silence fell over the yard. My mother tried to break the tension with a nervous laugh. Lydia, do not be dramatic. Lydia did not back down. No, I mean it. Some people only show up to ruin things for everyone else. Porch. I looked at her, then glanced around the table at the guests, pretending to sip their drinks and looking anywhere but at me. I did not argue. I did not cry. I simply turned and walked toward the gate. The gravel crunched under my shoes, and the wind chimes clinked softly above the porch. Not a single person followed me out. Standing by the curb, I called an Uber on my phone. Porch. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from a quiet sense of closure. The definitive answer I had spent more than a decade looking for was finally clear. On the way to the airport, I changed my flight and headed straight to Los Angeles. When the plane landed, the morning light was just breaking over the city. Porch. I had closed a trust transaction months earlier, and a car was already waiting for me outside the terminal. The driver held the door open. Good morning, Miss Callahan. We started driving along the Pacific Coast Highway toward Malibu, but then I directed him to change course. My true sanctuary was that mountain retreat in Telluride, Colorado. I needed to get back to my mountains. A few days later, sitting in the living room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the snowy peaks, my phone vibrated. It was a forwarded message from our internal platform inbox. The subject line read, "Strategic Partnership Opportunity. Sender, Lydia Callahan." The message stated, "Dear Lantern Team, I am reaching out to explore potential brand alignment. As you may know, my media reach is currently navigating a temporary adjustment following unsubstantiated claims from misguided clients. I am working with my advisory team on brand repositioning, and I want to partner with a platform that champions financial clarity and digital empowerment. I would like to connect directly with the founder." No last name attached to my account. She had no idea who built the multi-million-dollar platform behind the scenes. I looked at the screen for a moment, then typed a brief reply, "Thank you for reaching out. Your request has been directed to the relevant department. If there is a potential fit, our team will be in touch." No personal sign-off. After sending it, I leaned back in my chair. I felt no resentment, no sense of satisfaction, just complete detachment. By Monday, her brand was unraveling publicly. A boutique fitness group in Denver posted a statement detailing unresolved payments, ignored communications, and unfulfilled contracts. The post spread across platforms within hours, prompting other vendors to come forward with similar accounts. By evening, her business was trending across business and lifestyle feeds over breach of contract disputes. I sat on the terrace with the fire pit glowing, watching Lantern's user metrics rise steadily on my screen. 2 days later, a tech podcast released an episode titled "The Real Architect Behind Lantern." I had not authorized it. It featured a short segment pulled from an internal onboarding recording I had done earlier that year. In the recording, I was asked what pushed me to build the company. My voice replied, "When you are told repeatedly that there is no place for you at the table, you stop asking for a seat. You build your own space, and you do not need to put your name on the door." The host asked, "Were you ever underestimated?" I gave a quiet laugh. My family once questioned if I even understood basic formulas. That was the exact moment I started mapping out the core engine. The clip circulated fast. Early patent filings surfaced online, linking the name Evelyn Callahan to foundational architecture documents. Someone even found a short phone clip from Lydia's 30th birthday dinner, capturing the moment she told me to leave. The online community connected the dots. She is the sister who engineered Lantern, the one pushed out of the family circle. Late that afternoon, my phone rang from an unknown number. I declined it. It rang again, and I answered, "Evelyn." Her voice was unsteady. I stayed quiet. "Is it true?" she asked. "Are you the person behind Lantern?" Silence stretched before she let out a shaky breath. "Why did you never tell me?" "I tried once," I said. "You brushed it off." "I did not mean it like that. I know." A long pause followed before she whispered, "People are saying you planned this to bring me down." I looked out at the mountains, catching the cool moonlight. "I did not plan your setbacks, Lydia," I said evenly. "I just stopped stepping in to absorb the impact." The line went silent, followed by a click as the call ended. I stood there, phone resting in my hand, as the steady valley wind blew across the ridge. For years, I had wanted validation from them. Now that they finally saw what I had built, it did not matter anymore. When the broader story broke, snow was still clinging to the pine branches outside. I was having morning coffee in an old sweater when notification alerts started lighting up my screen. Lifestyle creator Lydia Callahan faces formal complaints over business practices. Articles carried her polished headshot, though the headlines focused on contract disputes and broken client agreements. The audience that once praised her was now documenting every unfulfilled promise. I scrolled through the updates with a sense of calm. Public perception often corrects itself over time when image takes priority over substance. I set my mug down and watched water droplets run down the glass. Accountability always catches up eventually. Over the next week, the coverage expanded. Past interviews where she talked about authenticity were re-examined against vendor statements. Then the video clip from the birthday party surfaced, showing her in her white dress telling me to leave, while I stood in the background with my coat. The clip gained traction, with viewers dissecting the dynamic and noting the contrast between the public persona and the reality behind closed doors. I made no public statements. The facts spoke for themselves. That evening, Rachel called. "Have you seen the coverage?" "I have." "You are very quiet about it. Nothing to say?" "Outcomes have a way of sorting themselves out," I told her. She took a breath. Fair point. The next morning, another call came in from my mother. Old habits run deep, so I answered. "Your sister's career is falling apart," she said, her voice tight with strain. "You need to step in and say something publicly. You have a platform now." I looked toward the snowy valley. "I spoke up years ago, but nobody wanted to listen." "This is no time to be stubborn," she pushed. "It is not about pride," I replied calmly. "It is about peace." Heavy breathing filled the line before she snapped. "You sound just like your father when he writes someone off." "Maybe he should have modeled what genuine support looks like," I said, and ended the call. That afternoon, I walked the trail behind the property. The air was thin, crisp, and fragrant with pine, my boots pressing into the fresh powder. Down in the city, the headlines were spinning, but up here, there was only open sky and quiet. When I returned, a voicemail was waiting from Lydia. "You have seen everything, haven't you?" Her voice broke. "You think I brought this on myself. I know you do. I never meant for things to turn out this way." She paused, her breathing uneven. "You were always the capable one. I resented that, but please do not let everything I built disappear." I listened through once, then pressed delete. The next morning, she appeared on a national broadcast for an exclusive interview, seated under soft studio lighting. The host leaned in. "There are reports regarding your family dynamic, specifically regarding your sister who developed Lantern." Lydia lowered her eyes, holding back tears. "I have always cared about my sister. Even when there was distance, I never turned away. I never wanted personal matters made public." I switched off the screen. The rehearsed responses held no weight anymore. A short while later, my legal team checked in. "Media outlets are requesting a statement. Do you want to issue a response?" "No," I answered. "Are you certain?" "Facts do not need managing," I said. "They stand on their own." For years, I had lived under their narrative. Lydia's profile, my mother's favoritism, my father's rigid expectations. Now, that fragile structure was coming apart under its own contradictions without any push from me. Another notification popped up. Lantern Foundation expands STEM grant funding for young women. I smiled quietly. Rachel was directing the initiative. While old dynamics played out on screen, our actual work moved forward steadily and independently. Spring arrived late in the mountains. The snow melted slowly, dripping steadily from the eaves. One morning, a heavy cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail, written in my mother's handwriting. I set it on the counter, letting it sit beside my coffee. Experience had taught me that silence often communicates far more than written apologies ever could. By afternoon, I finally opened it. 5 handwritten pages in blue ink. The opening lines relied on familiar excuses, mentioning early financial stress and claiming Lydia required extra attention. "She was always fragile," my mother wrote. "You were strong and self-reliant. You never seemed to need our help." There it was again, using the word independent to justify overlooking my needs. The letter closed with a plea. "Perhaps it is time to move forward. The house feels quiet now. I hope you can look past the past and consider the bigger picture." The bigger picture had never included me. I folded the pages and placed them on the desk, noticing a smaller envelope tucked inside with my father's stiff handwriting. Inside was a simple drugstore birthday card. Scrawled across the inside were the words, "Happy birthday, Eva." Eva. Not Evelyn, and not even the right month. A tired smile crossed my face. Torch. There was no anger left, just a final confirmation that he had never taken the time to know me. I did not discard the cards, nor did I dwell on them. I simply filed them into the bottom desk drawer, alongside early platform patents and a photograph from when I was 16, grinning with grease on my hands at a robotics competition, completely content without needing anyone's validation. Porch. That afternoon, I stepped out onto the balcony under the bright mountain sun. I took a plain note card and wrote a brief reply. "Some things, once broken, cannot be reconstructed. I am doing well, and I hope you are too." Beneath my signature, I added, "Evelyn Callahan, altitude 12,000 feet. No formal closing, no excuses, no accusations." Porch. It was not meant to invite further dialogue, but to mark a clear conclusion. I sealed the envelope and drove down to the local post office the next morning. The clerk asked, "Would you like tracking on this?" I shook my head. No tracking necessary. Porch. Morning light fell across the valley, casting a soft gold across the dining room where Tess, our newly appointed foundation director, had application files spread across the table. "Good morning," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Morning," I replied, setting down my mug. The table was covered with candidate profiles and photographs of young women, some reserved, some determined. Porch. "The cohort is finalized," Tess said, tapping the folder. "The inaugural scholarship recipients. You should take pride in this." I sat down, reviewing the names. Amira, Joe, Kelsey. Each file reflected parts of my own journey, the students who had been told they were too quiet, too technical, or did not fit the standard mold. "They have real grit," I said softly. "They do," Tess agreed. Porch. "They just need someone to open the door." I picked up a handwritten note from one applicant. "Dear Ms. Callahan, thank you for this opportunity. Having someone back my potential means everything. I hope to provide that same foundation for others one day." Tess smiled as she organized the folders. "It is fitting that you named the initiative after the space where it started." I gave a nod. Porch. "The room beside the staircase fund." "It fits," she said. "That space gave me focus," I remarked. "It taught me how to build from the ground up." I signed the authorization forms and Margaret prepared the final copies. Before I left, she handed me a formal statement sealed in a plain envelope. "Keep this on hand, only if strictly necessary." I slipped it into my purse. Porch. That evening, I booked a room in Charleston, not at the main harbor property, but at a smaller boutique hotel 3 blocks away. Then I packed my bag. Emily still assumed her primary concern was the frozen account. Jason still believed his only challenge was delivering Saturday's presentation. Neither of them understood the financial structures David had put in place years ago. Porch. The family estate they viewed as a backup safety net was legally ring-fenced. It was never an asset they had the right to leverage. The next morning, I flew into Charleston to ensure everyone understood the reality, before my assets were drawn into someone else's venture. I arrived in Charleston on a humid Saturday afternoon. The coastal air carried the scent of salt water from the harbor. Porch. Couples walked under old oaks draped in Spanish moss. Visitors took photos of historic pastel homes, and carriages moved along cobblestone roads. Everything felt calm, in sharp contrast to the conversation ahead. My luggage held 3 dresses, comfortable flats, essentials, and considerable unease. Inside my handbag rested Margaret's envelope. Porch. After checking into the boutique hotel 3 blocks from the Harbor Grand, I sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since leaving Alexandria, I wondered if traveling here was the right call. At 68, 3 years widowed, sitting alone in a hotel room because my 39-year-old daughter had run up charges on my account to support an image of business prosperity. It felt surreal. Porch. I checked my phone to find 4 unread messages from Emily. "Mom, please pick up. We covered the hotel balance with another card. Richard confirmed dinner for tonight. Can we please just get through this evening?" The second message caught my attention. Another card. "Good. They had found their own financing for the weekend. I had not come to leave them stranded. I came to draw a clear legal line between their obligations and my resources. At 2 in the afternoon, I called Margaret. "I have arrived," I said. "Are you certain you want to proceed?" she asked. "Not entirely." She gave a brief laugh. "That is the most sensible response you have given all week. What if this complicates things further?" "Nora, keep your objective clear. Protect my estate and make sure nobody assumes I am underwriting Jason's firm." "Precisely, without making a scene." "Exactly right." I tapped the envelope in my bag. "Margaret, what if Richard asks nothing about my involvement? Then you say nothing, no speeches. And if Jason claims I am providing capital backing? Correct the record directly." "Emily will be upset. She almost certainly will be." I sighed. "Attorneys have a unique way of offering reassurance. We bill hourly for reassurance," she answered with a laugh that finally made me smile. After hanging up, I changed into a navy dress David had always liked. At 4:30, I walked over to the Harbor Grand. The property was expansive, its high windows catching the late afternoon light. Polished marble floors shone beneath grand chandeliers, and fresh white lilies filled the entrance. I could see why Emily selected the venue. Every detail conveyed stability, affluence, and structure, the very things currently missing from their financial situation. At the front desk, I asked for Claire. A poised woman in her early 50s came forward. "Mrs. Harris?" "Yes, Claire Bennett." We shook hands. "Good to meet you in person," I said, even under complicated circumstances. "Likewise." She guided me to a quiet seating area near the lobby. "I wanted to verify," I said. "You noted earlier that my card was removed from incidentals and replaced by the guests?" "That is correct." "The original booking deposit remains on file, pending your formal review." "Understood." I looked toward the private dining suites. "Is the Magnolia Room ready?" "Yes." "Scheduled for 6? 6 o'clock." My stomach tightened. I thanked her and stood up. Just then, I heard my daughter's voice behind me. "Mom." I turned. Emily was 20 feet away. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. She wore a tailored green silk dress and heels, her hair styled professionally, looking entirely like the accomplished professional she presented to the world, except her face had lost all its color. "What are you doing here?" I walked toward her. "I think we need to speak." "You flew all the way to Charleston?" "I did." "Why?" "Because my financial identity arrived here before I did." She glanced nervously toward the front desk and lowered her voice. "Can we not do this in the middle of the lobby?" "Of course." She led me down a corridor into a small private lounge near the elevators. The moment the door closed, she turned around. "Mom, what is this about?" I already explained. "No, why come in person?" "To ensure no investor leaves tonight believing I am funding Jason's business." Her eyes widened. "You cannot walk into that dinner and say that." "Why not?" "Because Richard does not think you are backing the company directly. Then there should be no issue." She looked away, that small movement answering everything. "What exactly does he believe?" I asked. Jason walked him through the company's overall position. "That is not what I asked, Emily." "Does Richard believe that your estate serves as a financial backstop for Jason's firm?" She froze, the answer visible on her face before she even spoke. "It was referenced as part of our broader family background. My assets are not part of your commercial background." "I know that." "Are you sure you do?" "Yes." "Then why include them?" Her eyes welled up. "Because Jason needed Richard to know the venture has solid foundations, except the venture is over-leveraged." She flinched. "That is unfair." "No, that is simple accounting." She looked at me intently. "You sound exactly like Dad. I take that as a compliment." The lounge door opened and Jason stepped in. Seeing me, he stopped in his tracks. "Nora, Jason." He turned to Emily. "You said she was not coming." "I did not know she was here," Jason's jaw set. "Nora, can we discuss this tomorrow?" "No. Tonight is critical for our operations." "I am aware. You have spent months planning this. How many of those months were financed through my accounts?" His expression darkened. Porch. I apologized for that balance transfer. You apologized for the charges. I am here regarding my name. He looked confused. What about your name? My name, my property, my portfolio, and any expectation of assets Emily might receive down the line. Emily whispered, Mom, please. Jason looked directly at me. Nobody is touching your property. Good, then we agree on that. Porch. I opened my bag without pulling out Margaret's document. From this point on, neither of you has authorization to reference my state as collateral or support for Carter Residential. Jason let out a frustrated breath. You do not understand how investment pitching works. Then walk me through it. We have to demonstrate stability, network, and available capital. Porch. Capital under your direct control. Do you control my estate? No. Then do not present it to investors. He rubbed his forehead. Can we please hold this conversation until after Richard leaves? We cannot. Emily stepped closer. Mom, just sit through the dinner. That is all we ask. I looked at her. Meaning what? You do not have to say anything. Please, that sounds problematic. Porch. Please. Her voice cracked slightly. Just let Richard see our family together. Let him see stability. I looked at my daughter. Finally seeing the real reason they wanted me there. It was not just about the money. It was about presenting a picture. Porch. A retired widow with fully paid real estate and private investments sitting calmly beside them provided an unspoken assurance of family backing and financial resilience. I will not mislead anyone, I said. You do not have to mislead anyone. Just, if asked directly whether I am backing the venture, I will give an accurate answer. Jason's expression shifted instantly. Porch. Nora, understand that any hesitation tonight could cost us this entire deal. I looked at him calmly. If transparency breaks the deal, then the issue is not the transparency. The room went completely quiet. Emily carefully dabbed at her mascara, trying not to smudge her makeup, before speaking softly. Could you not just wait until dinner ends? I cannot, Emily. Porch. I stepped forward and took her hand. For a brief moment, I saw the young girl who used to come into my room during thunderstorms, the teenager who called me after her first heartbreak. I loved her. That was why this was necessary. For years, I shielded you from difficult outcomes, I said gently. But tonight, I have to establish clear boundaries. She closed her eyes. Porch. A hotel staff member knocked at the door. Mr. Carter, your guests have arrived. Jason went pale and Emily let go of my hand. Outside that door, Richard Dalton was waiting for a business presentation partially framed around an inaccurate portrayal of my financial estate. I reached into my bag, feeling Margaret's envelope. Then I followed my daughter toward the Magnolia Room. Porch. The Magnolia Room was more intimate than I expected, making the atmosphere feel even tighter. At the center stood a polished mahogany table set for 6 rather than the 12 originally planned. The guest list had clearly been scaled back. A presentation screen stood against the far wall, with twilight settling across the courtyard outside the high windows. Richard Dalton stood up as we entered. Porch. In his early 60s, with silver hair and a sharp, observant demeanor, he looked like a seasoned investor, accustomed to evaluating pitches. His wife, Susan, stood beside him. The moment Jason greeted them, his posture shifted entirely. His shoulders squared, and his practiced, confident smile returned immediately. Porch. Richard, Susan, thank you for joining us. He gestured toward me. This is Nora Harris, Emily's mother. Richard smiled, offering his hand. Nora, a pleasure. I have heard a great deal about you. That set off an immediate warning. All positive, I trust, he chuckled. Very positive. Emily gave me a quick glance. I said nothing. We took our seats. Porch. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation stayed light, centered on general introductions. When champagne was poured, I politely declined. Jason offered a toast acknowledging personal milestones. Emily smiled along, though I noticed her hand trembling as she lifted her glass. The main course was served, and the discussion turned to business. Porch. Richard asked about a proposed townhouse development outside Richmond that Jason was seeking to secure. Jason spoke with complete familiarity, breaking down construction costs, market demand, projected margins, and timelines. For a moment, it was easy to see his technical competence. That was what made the situation so frustrating. He was not incapable. He was an ambitious founder whose financial stress had led him to overextend and conceal operational deficits. After dinner, Jason stood up and turned on the display monitor. The presentation began, highlighting completed projects, client testimonials, growth trajectories, and financial forecasts. Then a slide appeared titled, "Financial Resilience." My stomach tightened. Jason spoke on receivables, company-held assets, and projected private placements. Then he delivered the line, "Additionally, we maintain substantial family financial backing, providing structural flexibility during short-term liquidity cycles." Richard turned to Emily. "Does that include the estate assets you mentioned previously?" The air in the room seemed to freeze. Jason hesitated and Emily looked down at her plate. I folded my napkin neatly and set it beside my plate. "Which estate assets?" I asked calmly. Jason's expression changed. Richard looked mildly surprised. Perhaps I misunderstood. "No," I replied evenly. "I simply want to ensure complete clarity on what was presented." Emily whispered under her breath, "Mom, please." I kept my attention on the table. Richard leaned back in his chair, taking in the room. My understanding was that Emily has access to private family holdings, and that there is an arrangement to provide operational liquidity if required. There it was. Not a formal legal guarantee, but an implied financial safety net. I looked at Jason. "Did you state that I am underwriting this company?" "Not in direct terms." "You allowed him to draw that conclusion." "Nora, this is not the venue for this discussion." Richard's tone turned direct. "Actually, Jason, this is the exact venue." Silence settled over the table. I reached into my handbag. Emily closed her eyes. I withdrew Margaret's envelope and laid the attorney's formal statement flat on the table. "I am here this evening because my name and personal estate were introduced into a commercial negotiation without my authorization," I said clearly. "I am not an investor in Carter Residential. I have not signed personal guarantees for its liabilities. I have not pledged my home, my investment accounts, or any private holdings, nor have I committed future capital to the business." Richard leaned forward, reading through the document carefully. Jason had gone completely pale, and Emily looked on the verge of tears. I continued, "I am not here to disrupt your evening. I am here because anyone considering a serious capital commitment deserves accurate financial disclosures." Richard folded the document neatly. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris." Jason sank back into his chair. "That makes the position sound far worse than it actually is." Richard turned toward him, then lay out the actual numbers. Jason swallowed hard. "We have encountered liquidity constraints." "How extensive?" "Manageable with new capital." Richard remained composed. "Give me the specific figures." Jason looked at Emily, then at me. Finally, he stated the actual balances. Receivables were significantly delayed, multiple subcontractors held overdue invoices, credit lines were fully drawn, one development had ceased generating projected cash flow, and another required immediate capital reserves to proceed. As Jason went through the line items, the polished presentation stripped away, leaving only the hard financial reality on the table. Jason transformed the moment his eyes landed on them. His shoulders squared instantly, and a polished, confident smile appeared on his face. "Richard, Susan, thank you so much for joining us tonight." He gestured toward me. "This is Nora Harris, Emily's mother." Richard smiled and extended his hand. "Nora, it is a pleasure. I have heard a great deal about you." That single remark put my guard up immediately. "I hope only good things," I replied evenly. He chuckled. "Very good things indeed." Emily shot me an anxious glance. I kept my expression completely neutral. We sat down. For the first 20 minutes, everyone played their part as though this were truly just an anniversary celebration. The server offered champagne, which I politely declined. Jason raised a toast to his marriage. Emily smiled, though I noticed her fingers trembling slightly against the stem of her glass. The main courses were served, and the conversation naturally pivoted. Richard asked about a townhome development. Jason was hoping to break ground on outside Richmond. Jason spoke with fluid authority. He broke down construction costs, local demand, projected margins, and operational timelines. For a few minutes, I almost lost sight of why I had come. Jason genuinely understood his trade. That made the reality even harder to stomach. He was not an incompetent fraud. He was an ambitious man who had let panic turn healthy ambition into reckless deception. Once the plates were cleared, Jason stood up and powered on the display screen. The presentation began. Completed portfolios, client testimonials, growth curves, and revenue forecasts flashed across the monitor. Then a slide titled Financial Resilience appeared. My stomach tightened. Jason discussed receivables, equipment equity, and anticipated capital investments. Then he delivered the line. We also benefit from substantial family financial backing, which provides us with the operational flexibility to absorb temporary market adjustments. Richard turned toward Emily. Does that encompass the family holdings you referenced during our introductory call? The air in the private room froze instantly. Jason paused. Emily lowered her gaze toward the table. I placed my cloth napkin beside my plate. What family holdings are you referring to? I asked quietly. Jason's face shifted immediately. Richard looked surprised. Perhaps I misunderstood the structure. No, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly calm. I would simply like clarity on what was just presented. Emily whispered under her breath, Mom, please. I kept my focus on the table. Richard leaned back in his leather chair. My understanding was that Emily is the designated beneficiary of substantial family assets, and that there is a mutual family commitment to support the enterprise if needed. There it was. Not a formal contract, but something far more convenient, an engineered impression. I looked directly at Jason. Did you tell this investor that I would be financially underwriting your business? Not directly in those words, Jason stammered. Did you intentionally leave him with that impression? Nora, this is neither the time nor the venue. Richard's expression sharpened instantly. Actually, Jason, I believe this is precisely the time. Nobody spoke. I reached into my handbag. Emily closed her eyes tightly. I took out Margaret's envelope and set it on the table. I am here tonight because my name and personal finances were introduced into a commercial negotiation without my consent. I slid the document across the polished mahogany. I am not an equity partner in Carter Residential Group. I have not guaranteed its commercial debt. I have not pledged my home, my retirement portfolios, or any other private assets, nor have I ever committed future financial resources to this company. Richard picked up the page and read through it carefully. Jason sat frozen, the color draining from his face. Emily looked as though she was on the verge of tears. I did not come to Charleston to embarrass anyone, I continued steadily. I came because if you are making a substantial capital decision, Mr. Dalton, you are entitled to verified facts. Richard folded the document with measured care. Thank you, Mrs. Harris. Jason sank into his chair, his voice defensive. That makes the situation sound far worse than it actually is. Richard turned to face him. Then lay out the actual situation for me right now. Jason swallowed hard. The company is experiencing a temporary cash flow constraint. How severe? It is manageable. Richard's face remained impassive. Give me the numbers, Jason. Jason looked at Emily, then at me. Finally, the real numbers came out. Milestone payments had been frozen by a primary developer. Outstanding invoices were owed to multiple trade subcontractors. Credit facilities were tapped out. One major job site was completely stalled, and another required immediate cash injection to proceed. The longer Jason spoke, the more the polished corporate illusion dissolved. Richard asked razor-sharp, unavoidable questions. What is the total balance currently overdue to your subcontractors? Jason answered with a number. When does your commercial credit facility come up for renewal? Another specific figure. What occurs if the stalled subdivision does not resume disbursements within 90 days? Jason hesitated. We would require outside equity or secondary debt, which you currently do not possess. No. And the personal resources referenced in your preliminary portfolio. Richard glanced over at me. Are unavailable, Jason conceded quietly. Richard nodded slowly. Susan, who had remained silent throughout the evening, turned her attention toward Emily. Were you aware the business was carrying this level of strain? Emily's eyes filled with tears. Yes. Was your mother aware? No. That single word hung in the room. Richard turned back toward Jason. Why were these figures not disclosed in your preliminary underwriting packet? I intended to walk through the operational context tonight. When? After showing me hypothetical revenue projections. Jason had no answer. Richard leaned back against his chair. For several long seconds, the only sound was the faint clatter of silverware from the hallway. Then, Richard said something entirely unexpected. Jason, financially distressed enterprises do not intimidate me. Jason looked up, startled. Distressed assets are what I specialize in. If your balance sheet were in pristine condition, you would not be sitting at this table offering equity. A faint glimmer of relief crossed Emily's face, but Richard held up a hand. What concerns me is when severe underlying risk has to be forced into the open by an outside party. Jason's brief hope faded. I was not attempting to misrepresent the fundamentals. Richard raised an eyebrow. You referenced family capital reserves that do not exist. We have family stability, moral support. Richard tapped Margaret's affidavit with his index finger. Moral support does not satisfy trade lien obligations, Jason. I felt a quiet moment of appreciation for his straightforwardness. David would have respected him. You presented a business undergoing manageable operational hiccups, Richard continued. What I am looking at now is a firm under severe structural distress. Jason bowed his head. However, distress is not always insurmountable. Emily leaned forward slightly. What does that mean for the proposal? It means I will not be making an investment commitment tonight. Jason gave a slow, defeated nod. I understand. I require access to your complete, unadjusted financial records. You can review whatever you need. Not the pitch deck records, the actual general ledger. Accounts payable, receivables aging, full debt amortization schedules, payroll liabilities, and state tax obligations. Every single line item. Jason cleared his throat. Understood. And I want written certification confirming that 0 family assets are pledged, unless the verified legal owner formally signs onto the structure. Jason glanced at me briefly. You will receive that confirmation. Richard turned to me. Mrs. Harris, I apologize if our transaction placed you in an uncomfortable position. You did not put me here, Mr. Dalton. No, Richard replied, looking back at Jason. I believe that is clear. The dinner concluded 20 minutes later. There was no shouting, no dramatic scenes, no slamming doors. In many ways, the quiet restraint made the consequences feel far more permanent. The luxury dining room remained pristine. The champagne buckets stayed chilled and the anniversary centerpiece sat untouched on the mahogany table. But the facade had completely fallen apart. Out in the hallway, Jason stopped me. You may have just cost us this entire deal. I looked right at him. No, Jason. If this deal collapses because an investor saw your verified financial reality, then a genuine deal never existed in the first place. Emily began to cry openly. Mom, do you realize what happens if he walks away? I do. No, you don't. She stepped closer, her voice cracking. We could lose everything we have built. A familiar protective instinct stirred deep inside me. Fix it, step in, write a check, shield her from the fallout. Then David's words echoed in my mind. Tomorrow's money is not today's safety net. I reached out and held Emily's trembling hand. I am sorry that you are frightened. She looked at me through her tears. I will not support a falsehood for you, I said gently. So you no longer have to carry the burden of maintaining one. Her expression hardened with resentment. You chose an absolute stranger over your own daughter. No, Emily. I let go of her hand. I chose the truth over a narrative you built using my name. I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, Emily said something, but her voice was muffled by the distance. Porch. I kept walking, knowing full well that our most difficult conversation had not even happened yet. Richard Dalton finally understood the truth about my assets, but Emily still did not know the reality of the estate she had been counting on. After everything that happened at that table, I knew I could not keep the legal structure from her any longer. Porch. At 7:12 a.m. the next morning, a knock came at my hotel room door. I knew the exact time because I had been watching the digital clock on the nightstand. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the scene from the Magnolia Room played on repeat. Jason by the presentation screen, Richard folding the formal affidavit, Emily weeping in the hallway. Porch. When I opened the door, Emily walked right past me without waiting to be invited in. The exhaustion of the past several months was etched clearly into her face. Her hair was pulled back into a hasty ponytail, her face was completely bare of makeup, and dark shadows circled her eyes. Richard wants to audit everything, she stated bluntly. I closed the door behind her. Good morning, Emily. Porch. The complete general ledger, payroll records, debt schedules, tax filings, every single document. Jason spent the entire night pulling files. I walked over to the small coffee station on the counter. Would you like a cup of coffee? She stared at me in disbelief. How can you stand there acting completely unbothered? I am not unbothered. Porch. You look completely detached while my entire life has been falling apart for days. Her jaw tightened. You humiliated us in that room. I set the coffee mug down. No. Yes, Mom, you did. I answered an explicit question regarding my assets. You walked into our private anniversary dinner uninvited with an affidavit from an estate attorney. Porch. I walked into a commercial pitch that was partially financed on my unauthorized credit card. You did not have to make a scene in front of Richard. When was I supposed to correct the record, Emily? After he committed capital based on an expectation of my wealth. You could have spoken to Jason privately. I tried. He told me he would handle it. Porch. His response proved to me that I needed to handle it myself. She shook her head bitterly. You wanted to punish us. No. You did. If my goal were punishment, I would have canceled every reservation remotely and filed an immediate fraud dispute with the bank before ever dialing your number. She looked away. I chose not to do that, I continued. So I am supposed to thank you? Porch. No, I am simply asking you to recognize the fundamental difference between punishment and accountability. A flash of anger crossed her face. Accountability? We might lose our home. I am truly sorry you are in that position. You are sorry? You have the resources to help us. There it was, out in the open. No more polite phrasing. Help in what way? You know exactly how. Porch. Say it plainly, Emily. She crossed her arms defensively. You have significant investment holdings. I looked at her steadily. You want me to invest capital into Jason's company? It wouldn't have to be equity, a bridge loan, a temporary guarantee. You won't even consider it. Porch. I have been forced to consider your financial decisions ever since a hotel called me to verify nearly $10,000 charged without my consent. We were going to pay that back. You have repeated that line for months. This situation was different. How was it different? Because this deal was supposed to stabilize everything permanently. I shook my head slowly. Porch. Emily, every crisis becomes the one thing that will supposedly fix everything. Her voice rose. You have more capital than you actually need. The core assumption had finally surfaced. I pulled out a desk chair and sat down. Tell me, how much capital am I permitted to retain for my own life? That is not what I meant. Then explain what you meant. Your house is fully paid off. Porch. You have the retirement portfolio's dad established. You receive a dependable pension. You are entirely secure. Yes, I am, and you are drowning. that does not convert my retirement into your operating capital. I never claimed it belonged to me. You charged my card without authorization. She flinched. That was a terrible mistake. You handed my estate summary to Jason. Arch. I shared family financial context with my husband. The savings David and I built represent decades of discipline. Every mortgage payment, every retirement contribution, every delayed luxury was a deliberate choice to secure our independence in our later years. Emily is my daughter, but that relationship does not render my personal security obsolete. George. If anything, loving her meant teaching her that boundaries remain essential, even when the person establishing them is your mother. I forgave Emily, but I did not erase what occurred. She honored her repayment agreement. Her access to my accounts was permanently revoked. George. And Jason was forced to rebuild his enterprise on verifiable financial ground, rather than using my retirement to guarantee his corporate present. Those boundaries were not acts of retaliation. They were the foundation for genuine repair. Perhaps someone reading this needs to hear this reminder. You can love your adult children deeply without underwriting their financial risks. George. You have every right to protect your home, your pension, your savings, and your peace of mind, even if you have the means to say yes. Establishing a clear boundary is never the opposite of love. Often, it is the only structure that allows genuine love to survive. If you had received that unexpected call from the hotel, how would you have handled the situation? George. Would you have canceled the card immediately from home? Confronted them in private? Or traveled to Charleston to ensure the facts were stated in person? Let me know your perspective in the comments. If you have ever had to establish difficult financial boundaries with family, feel free to share your experience. George. Your story might provide reassurance to someone tonight who needs to know they are allowed to protect their dignity and their future. Thank you for listening, and until next time, remember that saying no does not signal the end of love. Sometimes, it is the exact moment love finally learns mutual respect.